For weeks, his trial gripped the nation. A white teenager charged with shooting 3 white men, killing 2 of them at a Black Lives Matter protest last summer. Last week, Kyle Rittenhouse broke down as a jury acquitted him on all charges 15 months after that deadly incident. And now he's opening up to NewsNation about the trial, what happened at that protest, and his future. We went one-on-one with our Ashleigh Banfield. She is joining us right now live this morning. Ashleigh, thank you so much for being with us. Now, you asked Kyle Rittenhouse, 18 years old, about the decision to fire his attorney, Lin Wood. A lot of people across America didn't even know that he had new attorneys in this case, but let's listen to what he said.
Okay. We fired him because he was going on with all this QAnon and election fraud stuff and just stuff we don't agree with.
And so it was his political views that led to you firing Lin Wood?
A mixture of a little bit of that.
And what else was in the mix?
Just how he is as a person.
And what does that mean?
He's insane.
I mean, Ashleigh, I watched your interview with him in regards to this, and it sounded like the thoughts of Lin Wood, his worldview, did not match what Kyle Rittenhouse says is his worldview. Was that the bottom line?
I mean, that's what he told me. And it seemed that there is a lot of animus now for Lin Wood. But also, you know, I don't think it's just the political view. I think there was a discovery made that in Kyle's estimation, there'd been a lot of money raised for Kyle's bail, $2 million. And despite the fact that that money was raised, Kyle still languished in a jail cell. In Kyle's description, it was because he was a better money raiser in jail than out of jail. And so this battle sort of was on. And, you know, Kyle got new attorneys, Mark Richards, who we interviewed last Friday after the verdict. And Mark Richards himself was none too pleased with the way things played out for Kyle Rittenhouse early on in his case. And Lin Wood and his co-counsel were fired, and Mark Richards was retained, and you can see the result right there on your screen. It was an acquittal 5 times across the board.
When you were talking to him on your show, and he described the fact that the former attorney, Lin Wood, actually appeared, or rather, this is what he's saying happened. He reached out to try to get the money back just as the verdict was about to be announced in Kyle Rittenhouse's case. It sounds to me like there is another conversation that might be being had with Lin Wood. Did you reach out to him?
So I haven't had a chance yet because the interview was last night, yeah. And I just discovered this motion that he said, Kyle Rittenhouse said his attorney Lin Wood filed as the verdict was being read, and that is to retain the $2 million bond when it's returned. Legally speaking, Adrian, whoever posts a bond has the legal right to the bond. And Lin Wood posted the bond through his law firm. However, that could be now litigated if it's determined that, Kyle was getting an effective assistance counsel, or if there was something actually illegal going on in the representation of Kyle. So Kyle has retained some very, very competent civil attorneys down here in Southeast Florida. I'm in Southwest Florida right now, across the state last night, but he's retained civil attorneys, and I think there is a veritable flurry of civil lawsuits that will likely be launched, not just about this.
Well, talk a little bit about that. I want to get to these other talking points because you revealed so much in this one-on-one with Kyle Rittenhouse. But I know that there was discussions about even the president of the United States being sued over content surrounding whether Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist, a defamation of his character. Did he speak at all about possibly suing the commander-in-chief?
So on camera, he said he'd prefer not to comment. However, on Tucker Carlson's program, he said he felt as though he was defamed. He even used some very specific language, and that was actual malice. Now, I don't know any 18-year-olds who just throw that kind of lingo out without knowing what that really means. And actual malice is a standard that you have to reach if you're going to be suing a public figure. And the weird part is that Kyle Rittenhouse is the public figure in that scenario, not the president. The president wasn't the president at the time the alleged action happened. And when I say alleged action, if that's a civil alleged action, right. It happened. The president, who was a candidate, had a videotape that he circulated with a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse saying white supremacist. So that happened. And if Kyle decides to sue for defamation, at the time that was not the president. So it's not that you can't sue a public official like that, but you can sue a private candidate like that. But it's Kyle who would be the public figure, because Kyle was involved in a shooting a month prior, after which he became quite famous. So it's a very interesting lawsuit, if it ever happens. And here's where I'm going to make some news. I don't think it will. And if it does, I don't think it's going to prevail. There are plenty of talking points on either side of that argument. But I talked to Kyle afterwards, and he actually wants to sit down with the president. He'd like to meet him, tell him his side of the story, tell him about the trial.
Interesting.
To have that kind of angst and animus against him when I talked to him afterwards.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the larger question about white supremacy, and obviously it's something that's been talked about. Kyle Rittenhouse linked to the group the Proud Boys. Let's listen to that portion of the interview.
I didn't know that the OK hand sign was a symbol for white supremacy, just as I didn't know that those people in the bar were Proud Boys. They were set up by my former attorney, who was fired because of that, for putting me in situations like that with people I don't agree with, by having them set up for security without telling us their background. And if I would have known they were Proud Boys, I would have said absolutely not.
And he's speaking about a photograph that he took inside of a bar with his former attorney. You asked him about this picture and the fact that he has had a reputation in some portions of the community, or at least across the country, around the world, as being a member of a supremacist group. What were your thoughts after speaking to him about that?
Well, I was absolutely gobsmacked, actually, with his response, that he said his lawyers had sent him to that bar to meet those people in order to secure a security detail for a hearing at that lawyer's office. So follow the bouncing ball. It's a little confusing, but not much. He asserts, Kyle, that he had no idea who he was meeting. He thought they were construction workers, and he didn't know about the OK symbol when he took that photo, and that they offered to buy him a drink, and he agreed. Many people are, taking issue with that as well. And he said in Wisconsin, if a parent is with you, that's legal. You can have a drink in a bar. And he said his mother was with him. So on all those counts, it's important to know that that's what he said. He wasn't breaking the law by having a drink in that bar because his mother was with him. Odd. But more importantly, he said, as soon as I saw the headlines and I saw that these were Proud Boys, I didn't want to affiliate with them, and I fired my attorneys. I also went back and looked at the picture after the interview, because I thought I saw him positioning his hand in an awkward way, and he was making the OK sign sort of a little bit awkward or backwards. I don't know that that means anything. I just always think it's important to have a lot of data points. The person who was beside him was flashing the sign in the way that you would usually see that sign, but Kyle was flashing it kind of backwards. So there may be some truth to what he's saying. I'm not here to suggest one way or the other, just, again, data points.
Okay, let's get this in really quickly. We only have one more minute of time with you, and we're so grateful. He spoke about Black Lives Matter. Listen to this.
I support everybody's right to peacefully protest and demonstrate. And like I said, I support the right to protest and not burn down American cities.
I mean, in his own words, he said that he actually supports the movement. He just didn't appreciate or respect people looting or rioting or torching property. Was that essentially the bottom line there?
Well, interestingly, Adrian, I pressed on that and said, but what do you want to see for the movement as it progresses forward in our, cultural society? And I couldn't get an answer there. He just repeated the same thing. I support everyone's right to peacefully protest and not burn things down. I said, that part I get. What about you, when you say you support Black Lives Matter? What would you like to see for that movement? But I couldn't get an answer there. Again, I have to keep reverting back to the fact, Adrian, I'm a 54-year-old woman interviewing a teenager. Mm-hmm. And half the time I thought I'd have to be really tough on him. Half the time I thought that could be bullying as well. So I tried my best. I think I asked about 3 times to sort of for clarity on that. But he had a very formulaic answer for that.
But Ashleigh, do you think that he even grasped the gravity of this whole entire situation at 18 years old?
I mean, there's a couple of different situations, right? There's the trial and the factor that he was facing 75 years plus in prison, right? A life sentence for a kid who's 18, however long you live. I think he was getting his head around that, even though I asked him and he wasn't prepared for it. He wasn't prepared for that lengthy a sentence. But I don't think the veracity of the his truth has hit him yet. I don't even think he knows how much danger he's in or how big this has become.
Yeah. Well, I know that you talked about him maybe changing his name, and I think a lot of people would understand why. Ashleigh, we want to thank you again for this interview and for joining us this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to click on the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.